I'm going to just dive right in and start with the little caveat that I think this was a terrible idea to try to teach a class about just Chinese medicine broadly. This is a tremendously large subject, and the idea of doing an introduction to it in an hour is preposterous, and we're not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to think about today and then the session next week and the following as a little bit of a slice of some of the kinds of things that are possible for you to learn if you go deeply into any one of these three traditions of herbal medicine as someone who pursues them a little more deeply. Because, particularly with traditions that are quite different from your own cultural background, as Chinese medicine and Ayurveda both are for me, there's a long investment period when you're studying before you start to really get some of those profound returns and some of those insights that you came to the tradition for. So this is a little bit of like reporting from my own experience with this particular tradition, and then also maybe a little bit of encouragement of, if these kinds of things appeal to you, it might entice you to deeper or, more concerted study of Chinese medicine. And then we'll do the same thing next week for Ayurveda, and then the following for Western herbal medicine. And before we begin, I feel like, especially with the political climate that we're in now, it's important to spend a moment talking about the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural exchange, as I see it. Because it's never far from my mind that I am a white lady in the US practicing, Chinese medicine when I spoke absolutely no Chinese language until about a little more than a year ago when I started studying a little bit of Mandarin. And even then, I have no genetic or, cultural heritage of my own that would allow me to lay claim to this tradition. So I can only share from my perspective how I think about this question, but it's something that has come up a lot of times, and so I want to share my thoughts. So the first thing I think is that we have to think about what is that kind of underlying dynamic, and this is almost a way of looking at the world that I feel I have learned a lot from Chinese medicine about, of like, what is the flow of energy when you talk about something like appropriation versus something like exchange? And so in my view, cultural appropriation is when someone or a group of someones take not necessarily the monetary wealth or the physical resources of another culture that isn't their own, but instead take the maybe less tangible but very, very important and cultural resources like music, dress, forms of medicine, forms of thought and philosophy, language, words, take those things and use them or hoard them in a way that confines the benefit to the group that is taking. So it really is an energy that's about kind of reaching in, taking something that you think looks good or that seems cool or valuable from someone else, and then using it in a way that takes something from them and brings benefit to yourself or to your own group only. And cultural exchange is a very different animal, and I think it's extremely important that we are becoming more aware about cultural appropriation. But I think one of the things I've seen happen that I think is a not so good side effect is that there's a possibility that genuine cultural exchange could be dampened down, and that conscientious people who want to exchange with, learn from, and share with diverse cultures that are not their own might feel hesitant to do so, or feel that they have no right, or feel that they shouldn't ask a question, or they shouldn't read a book, or they shouldn't study a tradition of medicine, simply because of the difference in their own background. And so I think the important thing is, if you are genuinely moved by a tradition that's not your own, a cultural tradition that's not your own, is just to ask yourself, how is the energy moving? What is the benefit that I'm receiving? And then how am I returning or giving something back to honor this cultural form that has done so much for me? And a wonderful example of this was a teacher of mine who was a white guy from like suburban Virginia or something, who all his life was a tech person. And he went on vacation to Thailand, just for a vacation, and received a traditional Thai massage in a temple. And he's a computer geek, I don't think he had a massage in his life even. And he tells the story, he got up from the massage and he said to his friend who he came to the temple with, he said, "I want to do this for the rest of my life." And his friend said to him, "Well, hey, we can come back tomorrow. You can get another massage tomorrow." And David said, No, I want to learn how to do this, and I want to do this for the rest of my life. It was like he had encountered his purpose in that moment. And it took many years, but David went on to study the tradition very deeply, become trained, learn the Thai language. He became a practicing Buddhist in the Theravada style, which is practiced in Thailand. He set up a training institute for Thai massage in the United States that was the first of its kind, the first school outside of Thailand ever to be certified by the Thai government as teaching the tradition in a way that was correct and respectful and according to the lineage in which he was trained. And he always emphasized, when he trained practitioners, that we were receiving a gift from the Thai people, and that if this gift was to be part of our livelihood, something that was going to help us to earn a living and also to bring relief and comfort to other people, that this was a very good thing, and that we should remember the Thai people and the Thai culture in a meaningful way in our lives. And he highly suggested making a monetary donation to NGOs and charities that supported people in Thailand or Thai cultural preservation. And I think that is an absolutely beautiful example of genuine cultural exchange. And to watch David work and carry this tradition and interact with Americans and people from Thailand, people from all cultures, it was really, really something. So that's the frame I want us to have, and that's the model that I hope to live up to in my own way of trying to respectfully practice and interpret and share in this tradition. Okay. So if anyone has thoughts or questions about cultural appropriation, is this something that comes up for you guys? Is this something that factors in when you are either thinking about who you go to receive healing work, or what you choose to study or what you don't choose to study? Actually, I almost didn't study Chinese medicine for a long time because I felt like I really wanted to. I was like, I wish there's traditional Irish medicine or something. And it's the traditions in the West are just not intact in the same way. So I'd love to hear if you have questions or thoughts about that piece. And because I know that the delay is what the delay is, I'm going to continue pushing forward a little bit, and I'll come back and weave into your questions in the discussion if we have them. So I have to tell you that, oh good, there's some some stuff coming up. So Kayla says, yes, that cultural appropriation, this factors in a lot for me, especially for practicing and potentially teaching yoga. Nikki says, yes, I think there needs to be a lot of humility when teaching or transmitting cultural elements. Yeah, that's something that I work on cultivating all the time. I think for healing work in general, too, I think of humility as, it's as if humility is a cloak of protection, actually, that drapes over your shoulders. And when you're doing healing work, the more that you take yourself out of it in a certain sense, and the lower you get, the more things can flow through you, and the more effective I think the work can be, the safer you are also. Yeah. Okay. So for me, I don't think I had ever encountered something that was so hard for me to learn as Chinese medicine was at first. And the reason for this is because the way of thinking that was required for me to start to grasp and understand the concepts, the foundational concepts of like qi and yin and yang and blood and the heart and the liver and the 5 elements and how they transform into one another and all of these things. It was like I could learn the definitions, and I could remember what the what these things were supposed to mean, but it was like having a bunch of Legos or a bunch of blocks and trying to build a house, but you couldn't make them stick together, or you just couldn't get it all to be a functional whole. And it really took me a full year of study before I started to have some of those like moments of, whoa, I get it. It's all coming together. So I say this to encourage you that if you start reading some of the introductory texts, if you start getting into this tradition a little bit, and at first it's like just not even connecting for you, it's not making any sense, to stick with it if it really calls to you, because it does take some time if this is a new way of thinking. And once I got to one of the things, the things I learned from Chinese medicine that I don't think I could have learned any other way, is the incredible power of observation. And I think the way that I was educated and the way that I interacted with the world all my life was always like a sort of cause and effect based way of thinking and experiencing the world. So if you've ever seen a child, like a kid, maybe they're in a high chair, they're a pretty young toddler or infant, one of the first things that they start doing to test and understand the world is like they pick up their thing, their binky or their toy or whatever, or their food or whatever is within their reach. They grab the thing and then they hold it out over the edge of their chair and they drop it. And then they see what happens, and they keep doing this. They drop it and the same thing happens again and again. And this is the best game in the world. This is especially a fun game for small humans when their parents or caregiver or auntie or somebody comes and then picks up the thing, gives it back to them, and then they do it again, And in a certain way, I feel like my education taught me to be that baby with that thing on my, in the tray of my high chair, that I just keep dropping it and watching what happens again and again. Now, of course, as you get older, your experiments get a lot more complicated. You're doing things that are more complex. But it was always about searching for a cause and effect relationship. And that was really the only, even when people get into sort of amateur debunking of scientific conclusions that they don't like or something, or that they do like, you always hear people saying correlation does not equal causation. And that's true. Just because two things coincide or kind of go in a trend in a similar direction doesn't mean that one is causing the other. But implied in that statement, correlation does not equal causation, is a judgment that the only thing really worth finding out is a causal relationship. That if all you've discovered is a correlation, who really cares about that? Why, that big whoop kind of a thing. The way that I've learned to be with a client or be with a question or observe the change of seasons and the weather, my mood, myself, from the practice of Chinese medicine is completely different. There are some babies that are not terribly active, and they don't push on the world that hard. They don't throw their stuff around quite so easily. They actually just, they sit there. They kind of sit there. And you can, if you've ever seen a baby that's like this, and a baby that's not like this, you can really, there's a real constitutional difference. And I have no idea what it's like to be that peaceful baby that's just, taking everything in, but I'm trying to learn. And what has happened for me is that as I have gotten better at observation, so, really noticing not just, oh, I have a headache, or someone said to me, well, I had a headache last week. It's like, there are so many things. That opens up an entire universe for observation. And if the first thing that we do is jump to a question about, well, what caused the headache? If I start really going hard down a path of like, well, did you eat something different the day before? Or did you have gluten, or did you drink red wine, or, something like that? It closes off all kinds of possible connections and all kinds of depth that is available to us just through observation in that moment. And the problem that arises as soon as you start practicing a little bit deeper observation is that you run into a place where your language can't take you anymore. Our language, we use our language to describe the things that we see and that we interact with and that we experience, and the things that that make us want to do something, or get something, learn something, like, or things that we feel inside. And it's impossible, really, to deeply observe something new without running into this problem of like, how do you describe it, or how do you think about it? How do you stay focused on it if you don't have any words, or if you don't have any way to kind of anchor the experience? And so even though this isn't explicitly a Chinese medicine technique, this is where sort of the cultural exchange piece comes in, and some of my own cultural heritage kind of picks up. I've found that what is really needed in order to observe deeply is to encourage myself and my clients to speak about things in metaphorical language. So using things like, my headache feels like blank, or it feels as if. It sort of invites comparison and metaphor. So a common one would be, it feels like someone is sticking an ice pick right here into my eye, or it feels like two two hot streams are coming up the sides of my head and together at the top of my head. There's no one word to describe that, right? So you have to kind of push a little bit with images, metaphor, and story. And this can be really hard to let yourself do or to encourage other people to do if we all are trying to, be realistic and not exaggerate and be clear, and especially people who feel like I want this practitioner to take me seriously. I don't want to be engaged in hyperbole or something. But that metaphorical language is really helpful. So when you feel like you come up against the edge of something that you don't understand, I think one of the best lessons that Chinese medicine could teach you is just to be that sedentary baby. It's not trying to reach out and grab something or notice a cause and effect, but be the sedentary baby that's observing, and get as much detail as you can, get as much information as you can, and then push yourself to go further by describing what you're noticing or what you're experiencing using metaphor, story, or images. And in fact, even though it's not something that is described as a technique in any of the Chinese medical texts that I've ever read, it is very much modeled in the language and the writing of the Chinese classics, which the observation of what you and I might call nature, but meaning, trees and forests and, outside, like nature, where there aren't so many buildings and where people haven't interfered. Chinese medicine understands that everything is nature. Even stuff that humans make is still nature because we belong to nature. So it's all nature. And the observation of a tree or a mountain through the seasons, or a little tiny plot of garden that you cultivate, or the changing of your own emotions and energy throughout the day. These things are all the same, all part of the same thing, and similar language will be used to describe all of these things as they transform and exist and be themselves. So that's the first piece. So I think I'd like to ask all of you, what is something in your life that you feel you could observe more closely? That something where maybe there's a little bit of emotional, not super dramatic, but something that like there's a little bit of emotional intensity around it, and you've been trying to figure it out or figure out cause and effect or manipulate it, like get in there and change it, manipulate it somehow. And what might it be, like something like that you would want to try observing instead of manipulating? Helen says, so would you say TCM is looking for something else besides cause and effect, a different goal? Or is it more that it is looking for something more than cause and effect? Oh, that's a good question. Well, so first I have to address this TCM piece. So thank you for this, Helen. So I didn't know this until I was getting ready to travel to China last year. And this acronym, TCM, Traditional Chinese Medicine, I very specifically did not use it today when I named the class, because I used to think that traditional Chinese medicine just meant, Chinese medicine starting a long time ago and include herbs and acupuncture and all the 5 branches and this whole thing. But in fact, traditional Chinese medicine is a specific kind of Chinese medicine, a brand of it almost, as it were, that is the currently approved and sanctioned version of the total body of Chinese medicine as approved by the government of the People's Republic of China. And the People's Republic of China is a communist country, and there's a lot of repression and a lot of ideologically motivated kind of political control, and medicine has not escaped this. And so there are elements of the classical Chinese tradition, particularly those elements having to do with spirituality, having to do with sort of the soul, the emotions, the deeper self. Those things have been scrubbed from TCM and are not present. And TCM, as practiced in modern China, has in some ways, I think, unfortunately, been very well, and fortunately, it's both, been really, really strongly influenced by the Western scientific tradition. So the good part is there is some really fascinating, tremendous scientific research about traditional Chinese medicine coming out of China. Really brilliant studies and fascinating design. And there's also a real temptation toward reductionism and toward this kind of cause and effect thinking that, it's very useful. It's so important for that little baby to know that gravity exists. This is like a physics lesson. This is how you learn about gravity. It's important. But it's limiting if it goes so much in that direction that we lose some of what the classics had to offer. So that is that piece. So in a way, I think modern, TCM is getting very interested in cause and effect in a certain way. But I do think that it's yes and to all of those things. I think that it's at its best, the Chinese tradition teaches us to look at what might be underneath cause and effect, what is underneath the always unfolding transformations from one season to the next, from one stage of life to the next, from as the qi moves from one meridian, one organ system to the next through the cycles of the day. What is underneath those changes that is enduring, and then what coincides with those changes that helps us to notice them. So I think about it. I thought of this last week. I went on a mushroom hunt, my first one of the season. And I thought about this correlation versus causation thing, and I thought, when you're mushroom hunting, you look for like signature species that kind of tend to live in the same place as the mushroom you're looking for to like tip you off that you're in a good spot. Or you look for like the pleasing fungus beetle, as my mushroom teacher called it, like that has a very particular little pattern move. And when you see that beetle, like, oh, there's probably some really good edible mushrooms here because that beetle likes to live in those mushrooms. Now, nobody is going to argue that the beetle causes the mushrooms to be there, or that the other species that live alongside the mushrooms cause the mushrooms to be there. But when you see them, it indicates that there's some deeper commonality that's present. And you could, if you got interested in it, figure that out. Like, oh, is it a certain kind of, loamy, sandy loam kind of soil that the mushroom really likes, and that also, this other species likes. You could kind of dig down and try to get to what that underneath thing is. Or you can simply do what works. There's something very pragmatic in my experience about Chinese medicine of doing what works, treating what you see, and answering those questions when you have to, but not really trying to answer those questions just because it makes you feel like a powerful brain that has figured everything out and dissected the world and traced everything into a neat set of cause and effect. It allows, I'll say this, at its worst, when we really take this kind of cause and effect thinking all the way down, to the bottom, to the most reductionistic kind of thinking that is possible, which would hypothesize that there's no free will, nothing means anything, it's all random, and everything is predetermined based on the arrangement of the molecules before the Big Bang, and it just happened, and everything unfolded exactly as it had to, according to cause and effect from the beginning, and it will continue to do so until the end. And that kind of thinking is so bleak and so harmful to the human soul that it causes despair and meaninglessness, hopelessness, this kind of thing. When, on the other hand, when we look at the world as a sort of a collection, an amazing, complex unfolding of a mystery that can never be truly solved, that can only be observed as deeply as possible, that I experience that as so life-giving. I experience that as an invitation into the mystery, an invitation into witnessing and participation and collaboration, creative collaboration with that mystery. Both ways of thinking have their use and their gifts that they offer. But I think part of why learning a tradition like Chinese medicine is so powerful for someone like me is that there weren't a lot of other ways for me to get that in an intellectually rigorous way in my Western education. Okay. Kayla says this is something that would benefit from more observation. My food intake, habitual eating, cravings, how much I actually enjoy different foods and how they make my body feel. I like that, yes. And you can get so granular with these things, if you think that the image of like the universe in a grain of sand, how much could there be to observe in a food, even a very familiar food that you've had so many times? If you've ever done an eating meditation, some of you maybe have tried, where you take a single raisin and you like smell it and you feel it, you look at it really closely and observe it, and then you put it on your tongue and hold it there, but you don't chew it or eat it. You just feel the weight of it, and then you breathe, and then very slowly you start to chew it. And it's an unbelievable experience. If you've never done this, I encourage you to try it. There's so much more in each little experience that we rush through in the day, so much more to observe. So I really like that. Nikki says, I'd like to take a closer look at my sleep patterns and energy levels. Yes, that's a really good one. Sleep is a very interesting thing to choose as an observation, as a realm of observation, because it entails some pretty dramatic shifts in your own consciousness, and your observing self changes and vanishes at points during your sleep. So that's a very cool one, and maybe a very advanced one. You might like to look into Yoga Nidra if you are very interested in that. That's more from next week, from the Ayurvedic situation. But there's a whole technology that yoga has developed for this very thing. Kayla says, I love the beetle example. I learned how fun and important detective work is when understanding a natural phenomenon. I've noticed the same useful detective work with the healing process as well. On a lighter note, it's a fun adventure with many clues to learn along the way. Yes. Yeah. Cool. And Helen, you'd heard that some people were moving away from using the term TCM, hadn't heard the reasoning. Yeah. And the mushroom example really helps. Good. I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm not trained in classical Chinese medicine. There's a really great kind of movement of reviving and studying the classics and classical Chinese medicine here in the West. Some people who are doing that out on the West Coast, actually. And I have not done that training, and I can't read classical Chinese, but I'm at least attempting to broaden my own understanding and my own practice beyond TCM, which is really very much where I started. I'm hoping to open that up a little more. Helen says, thinking more about how I see plants in general, it's really resistant to being broken down into cause and effect. They are whole beings and cannot be reduced to an active constituent. Yes, this is so much my experience. Yes, the complexity and the context. I think that's another thing that that is something that's possible to understand more deeply when you get out of cause and effect brain is context brain. That, a half teaspoon of salt in a pint of ice cream is a very different experience from a half teaspoon of salt in a pot of soup. So context and the context in which a plant is grown, in which a plant is consumed, what else is happening around it at the same time, what is the context of the body, the constitution in which, to which the plant is being absorbed or being taken. Yeah. Okay. So that's observation. We've talked about that a lot longer than I thought that we would. And I think really these next two things, there are some like really simple things that I learned from Chinese medicine that I didn't learn anywhere else. One of those things is just how effective herbs are. I think when I first began this work, it was more like faith and hope than anything. I don't think I ever had any idea that it would be possible for me to work with a client who, last year I had someone come to me with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease on a whole bunch of medications. I never worked with this particular illness before. It's not a system of the body I work with all the time. And not because of me at all, but because of this tradition, I was able to understand and observe the patterns that were going on, do my due diligence about herb-drug interactions, make a formula for this person, and he steadily improved and came off of a bunch of his medicines that he had been wanting to come off of, that his doctor took him off of. And a year later, he told me, I just heard from him maybe 2 weeks ago, he's been doing great this whole time, and his lung capacity is, now between 80 and 90%. And, never did he think that this would be possible, nor did any of his physicians ever think. I can tell you that I didn't believe, even when I started working with that particular client, and, I'd been doing this work for years at that point, I didn't believe that it could possibly be that good, or that it could possibly work that well, or that herbs could do so much. So if you have any doubts about that, you're not alone. I felt absolutely the same way. And it wasn't until I learned and started working in the Chinese tradition that I started getting results like that. I've never gotten results like that from using just a Western herbal paradigm. I haven't. And so I think if I hadn't learned from the Chinese tradition, I wouldn't really know the full capacity of what herbs can do. And it raises questions about, well, it's not like the herbs that happen to grow in Asia were so much better than the herbs that happened to grow in Europe. I don't believe that. In fact, there's some grow both places. So I think it's actually this is where the cultural wealth of thousands of years of elaborated and tested tradition makes the crucial difference. And that was interrupted and lost in the West. So I think there's a real inspiration for people who are committed to Western herbal medicine, or who are committed to any healing tradition, whatever it is that you love and believe in and want to nurture and make better and stronger. The continuity of the Chinese tradition and the rigor of the scholarship and the practitioners over so many generations and continuing to through today is absolutely staggering. And that is what makes medicine powerful. That's what makes modern conventional medicine powerful too, is that there's a system, and there are many, many people working in that system to constantly improve and test it and refine it and make it better. And I think that's what I hope we all contribute to, and whatever your field might be, that we each are just doing our one little bit to forward, carry the knowledge forward and do a little more. So mostly, I on a very fundamental level, Chinese medicine is what has taught me that herbs can do things that I previously would have thought were miraculous, and that it can do them very reliably in all kinds of different situations under pretty hard conditions, and even with someone who's relatively. I've been doing this work for a matter of a handful of years, not 15 and 20 and 30 and that kind of thing. So it's really a testament to this kind of traditional wisdom being passed down. Okay. I'm really so grateful. I'm so grateful for it. So the other two things that I really learned, the first year, so there are some concepts within Chinese medicine that when I first read them or learned about them, they made no sense to me. One of them is this: the idea of the yin within the yang, and the yang within the yin. And so these are, the yin and the yang are these sort of two complementary energies, that tendencies, patterns that are mutually, they're in some ways opposite. They are in some ways mutually engendering, like they give rise to each other, and they contain each other. They contain the seeds of each other. And, if you think about okay, yin is heavy, substantial, feminine, dark, wet, the flesh and the bone of the body. Yang is bright, hot, masculine, movement. It's the when my arm moves, that's the yang. It's not, my arm itself is the yin, the movement is the yang, So you kind of can get that, okay, I can basically get those definitions and try to look at those patterns. And then you hear something like the yang within the yin and the yin within the yang. And you go, and my white girl brain just goes what? I don't know. What is that? So I remember this was maybe about a year and a half after I first started studying Chinese medicine. It was winter. It was early March, late February, early March, something like that. And I had gone to a doctor's appointment, and I was leaving, and I came outside, and all of a sudden, I felt the air. It was a cold day. It was winter. It was a cold day. But I felt something that I had never felt before. I felt within the still remaining winter, yin, okay? Within the yin, I felt this little tiny shift, this it was just as cold as the day before had been. But there was something I had never noticed in my life until that day that was the turning of the season, where it was just that little tiny pivot had happened and that yang was starting to come forth, and I could feel it in my body. And even now, trying to describe it to you, I'm running into that problem I described earlier about like when you observe something new and you run out of language. I'm having that experience right now. And it hit me like an insight, like just and I wanted to run down the street telling everyone like, spring is coming, the yang is bursting forth. And I can't even tell you how exciting that was. And now I watch for that turn, in the winter. It's such an encouraging thing to watch for and to know how to feel, because you do get to that point where you really don't want it to be winter anymore. So that experience gave me a taste of starting to be able to observe and sense, and this is so helpful for healing. How do you sense the dormant but very real seed of the opposite that lives within any given situation, within any given moment? So being with someone who is in a state of very, very raw grief. I went through quite a big grief of my own last year, and then kind of like as soon as I had enough bandwidth for it, my practice like filled with people who are moving through grief of all various kinds. I mean, I'm never before did I have. I don't think I ever before had someone who identified grief as like a primary thing that they were working with, but it goes like that sometimes. So being able to sit with someone in very real grief, and without having to say it or acknowledge it. This is really important for those of you who do healing work. You have to be like, when it's still winter and you feel that yang coming forward, you don't put on your shorts and a tank top and like pretend that it's spring, because it's still winter. But your observation can get big enough to include things that are so new and so tiny that before you might not have noticed them. So how do you observe within grief the dormant but almost peeking forward new shoot of new creative growth that comes out on the other side? And as the person who is facilitating healing, it is vitally important that when someone comes to you and is sitting with you and they're suffering, that you both really witness and understand their suffering, and that you are in touch with the part of them that is always well, and that is entirely untouched by grief, disease, whatever, poverty even, whatever it is, the part of them that is entirely whole. And again, because the Chinese tradition has taught me to sit with complexity and not to reduce things to cause and effect, it has helped me not to fall into the trap, the overly simple and very dismissive trap of saying to someone something awful like, well, it's really great, actually, that in a way, isn't it so fortunate that your dog died? Because now you get to, now blank happened. This cause and effect is so, it's so dehumanizing when we see that newness or that goodness sprout after something really awful. and then we try to tell a story about cause and effect, and oh, isn't it good that the bad thing happened because now the good thing happened. Well, it's much more human to actually just hold the complexity of a bad thing happened and a good thing happened, and maybe at the same time, or maybe still more good and more bad things are going to keep happening forever and ever. And if we take Helen's comment from earlier, what's even deeper underneath what we experience as good and bad, underneath what we experience as health and illness, underneath what we experience as loss and birth and discovery and forgetting. Yeah. It really wasn't what I had planned to say, but I felt like I kind of got on a roll there and that it felt very true. So I wanted to share that. So I think that is, and in a way, this is something. Jung has been my bridge in a lot of ways between to help me cross a little bit into understanding, some of the thinking in Chinese medicine. Jung has a similar orientation where he's always looking for the opposite or trying to include or make whole, enlarge the picture. So there is a piece of that in the Western tradition, and that has really helped me to kind of cross over that cultural gap. Okay. I'm going to pause. So tell me about including or sensing the opposites, sensing the transformations and the transformations of form without getting stuck in cause and effect. What is that like for you? Have you had an experience like that, I wonder? Or an experience of observing something very simple in nature. Of course, it's all nature. Observing something simple in nature that gave you an insight about something else that you had been, that wasn't illuminated for you before. Let's talk about that for a second. So while we're waiting for a little more conversation, I'm just going to say that next week we're going to be back doing something similar. I'm going to share my personal reflections and experience of what I've learned from Ayurveda. And actually, Ayurveda, even though I have a sense that it offers many of these same lessons that I learned from the Chinese tradition. What I learned from Ayurveda is very different. It's a totally different flavor, and it's much more earthy and feminine and embodied. And that was my personal experience of it. And I am looking forward very much to sharing some of those things with you next week. Nikki says, this is the best way I find to teach new language, working with opposites to create context and meaning for a concept to be born and language to come forth. Wow. Wow, Nikki. I wish someone would teach me language like that. Kayla says, it is so valuable to understand that a healer must be in the role of sitting with the wholeness and being humble about that power. I have needed and sometimes still need a sitter to see my wholeness. Yeah, we all need that. We all need that. If you look around the world, a lot of spiritual traditions, that is what those functions of, priests and clergy, of all different kinds are doing, shaman, that is a lot of what, many, many kinds of healing practice are like. I think that universally we need that. And psychotherapy, all of these things. I think we all need that. And part of why I'm teaching this series and part of why I'm always talking about, like, if you're a healer and when you're a healer, is because I think we all need to do this for each other. I think we're all healers in some way. So we all need it, and we all can try to do it a little more. So it's needed for everybody. Nikki says it's so helpful in education to make room for the bigger picture, not to reduce it. There is more room for reality. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh. Nikki, this is so exciting. Helen says, I'm thinking of being really vulnerable and needing someone to take care of you in one area, but at the same time also being completely self-reliant in another area, both being true at the same time. Yeah, you just told the story of my life, Helen. That we can have permission, actually, to be all of it, to be both really competent and really incompetent, and maybe sometimes about the same thing, but oftentimes it will be in different domains, or to be, to have this kind of full range of experience and being, and that those things can transform into one another over time. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I really think the last thing I'll just say is this is not unique to the Chinese medicine understanding of the body and of the world, but I think that my culture, American culture, is suffering from some particular weird delusions about this, that it's helpful to have other perspectives to help remind us about the wrongness of this thinking. Transformation and change is constant. And it's a lot of times happening so slowly that our brains create for us the illusion of stability, so that it's easier just to live and function and not be alarmed. But the more and more that we train ourselves, that I have trained myself to see constant change and transformation, starting with observing the seasons is the best way of doing this that I know. Or even just observing the cycle of a day and then observing it again. That everything is always changing completely. Summer and winter are completely different from one another, Everything is always changing completely, and yet there is some deep continuity and some deep sense of return and safety that we can find even amidst that change. And a sure way to suffer, especially as it relates to your journey of physical and health and healing and development, is if you decide that there is one ideal state for your body to be in, and then it should just stay like that forever, because it won't and it can't, and it is not possible. It's not real. It wouldn't be alive. In fact, that would be death. To have that happen would be death. So I think, and we catch ourselves in this. I caught myself in this a couple of weeks ago, because I have a new beau in my life, and I had this fear sort of came up of like, oh my gosh, well, what if he's attracted to me as I am now, but I'm different. I look different now than I looked, 2 years ago or a year ago. And what if he wouldn't, what if I look like that again? He isn't attracted to me anymore. And my friend, who's not a Chinese medicine practitioner, but who's very wise, gave a perfect Chinese medicine answer. And she said, well, of course you're going to change. And of course you're not going to look the same. of course that's going to happen. And she, of course, she's right. And I think it's important to notice and to catch ourselves in these moments when that kind of delusion sneaks in and says, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when this changes? What's going to happen when, when the kids are grown and they're all gone? Or like, what if the kids, what if they're not here anymore? Like, what will I think that, what will I do then? Or what if, what about like when I'm not in school anymore and I have to be doing my own practice, or I have to decide what's next for my life, or, whatever, or when I have to do my taxes and like that's coming, so we can prepare for the things that we anticipate. The gift of these big brains of ours is that we can plan ahead and prepare and take care of our future self. But we must never operate and try to catch ourselves operating under that delusion that things will not change. And the more that we can live in the change, observe the change, get to know all of the hard to name, variables, use your metaphors and let the language emerge, come forth, as Nikki was saying. The more that you can understand those forces that are always operating and facilitating and influencing change, I think the better. So with that, my computer is telling me it's going to sleep soon unless I plug it in. So I think it's time to end. Thank you all so much for being here and for all of your birthday wishes and all of your congratulations on my personal life happenings. And I'm looking forward so much to a very different kind of conversation with you next week about Ayurveda. And I'm just so grateful for all of you. I'm so grateful that I get to think about this stuff and do this work and share it with you and learn from you. It's really just, I feel incredibly lucky. So thank you all for being in my life and for watching this video. And I hope that you have a beautiful week. Okay, I'll talk to you guys soon. Good night.